On this, the 29th of May, 2024, it's the voting day, and some have called this the most important election since 1994. But let's make sense of what today means to millions of South Africans who are heading to the poll. And for that, we're joined in studio by political analyst Malaika Mahlatsi. Malaika, good morning to you. Welcome to Channel 405.
Good morning, Naledi, and good morning to all the viewers who are joining us.
I want to start with the basics. I mean, over 27 million people expected to cast their vote. I think over the past 2 days, it was supposed to be 1.6 during these special votes, only about 900,000 of them coming out. But interesting numbers. This is the highest number we've had in our democratic dispensation of registered voters. What do you think this says about civic education in South Africa and whether or not we're on the up where that is concerned?
So I'm not sure if it's necessarily about civic education, right? More than it is about an urgent understanding from the South African collective about the implications of the next 30 years, right? I think we have had a lot of reflection on the last 30 years, and I think the developments of the last 30 years have shaped a lot of political consciousness in our country. But we're also seeing a great interest amongst younger people who are not historically, very active in voting in particular. In the 2019 election, you'll remember that the cohort, the 18 to 29-year-old cohort, had the lowest turnout in terms of votes. And of course, according to the IEC, following the last voter registration, which was in February, the 77% of the new registered voters fell within that cohort. So I think we are seeing an interest in the number of young people who are particularly who are taking active interest in the political process. But I also think that South Africans have, for the last 3 decades, experienced a very, sharp change in circumstances for the good or the worse. And I think there's a lot of interest in people saying, finally, we are seeing the necessity of taking a stance and, lending our voice to what this South Africa must look like. I think we've had an experience of democracy. 30 years it's not a very long time, but it's long enough that we've had this experience. And so we have a clear idea of what kind of South Africa we want to see and what kind of South Africa we don't want to be part of anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the circumstances that South Africans have had to live with, right? Some of them, and you say, some of them wanting to go to the polls to change their current circumstances. Some of them obviously unhappy with them. And we've got our reporters in various parts of the countries. One of them is in an area called Kiskamauk, where residents are saying that they've been waiting for a land claim since 1998 that the government simply has not processed. And so according to them, no elections are going to be taking place. I wonder where that sort of, where you place that sort of thinking that says, well, the only thing that we have to protest now is to stop those very elections. Is that a community that's felt unheard?
I think in fact, one of the things that I argue is that, South Africa, there's a very common argument about this thing people call, even for example, the fact that young people are not showing up to the polling stations, and it was termed as, youth voter apathy, that young people are apathetic and they're apolitical and they don't want to get involved in this political process. And I've always said that, in fact, it's on the contrary. Even research indicates that young people are, in fact, very political, right? Young people are politicized in their thinking. They are political in the decisions that they make. And even the decision to not cast a vote is a very political decision, right? And at the heart of that decision is this feeling of dejection, this feeling of not being heard, this feeling of not being represented, this feeling that the political process in itself does not reflect their thinking, their aspirations, and their own politics, as it were. And so I think when we look at communities like Kiskamauk, we hear people saying, we are not going to vote because we have not been heard and we've got these particular problems and these particular challenges, I don't see that as a rejection of, or an apolitical stance that they're taking, or a non-engaged stance. I think that is a very deeply political position that people are taking. And it's a position that fundamentally communicates that we don't want to be part of a process in which we are not recognized. Because you must understand also that, for communities like that, the elections are only one part of the democratic process. They get engaged thereafter. And this is where, the importance of participatory democracy comes in. People get involved, they get engaged, they participate in the development of the IDP in their municipalities and so on. And when they don't see necessary changes that they would have been fighting for over a long period of time, because the land issue is not a new issue in Kiskamauk, it's always been there. Even in the IDP, it's one of the key issues that they are raising. And when they don't see those changes, it creates a sense of alienation and a sense of feeling that the political process and this election tool in itself does not bring fundamental change into their lives. And so I see it as a different form of engaging in a different form of protest rather than them being apolitical or not wanting engagement. It's a very deeply political statement to not want to participate in elections.
And that's a stance, to not want to participate. And then on the flip end of that, you've got a community that our reporter Ntando Nyandu is keeping a close eye on. And I really want you to stay with us throughout the day, because this is a particularly interesting community. It's called Engovukeni. It's in northern KwaZulu-Natal. The small community is surrounded essentially by a hippo-infested river, and then on the other side of it is the Indian Ocean. It's essentially a community that one could argue is cut off from the rest of the country. The IEC needing to ferry the ballot papers in to that community over perilous waters. I mean, you need to see this as well. But in the previous election in 2019, that tiny community had 196 voters. 193 of them voted for the ANC. 3 of them voted for the EFF. What does that tell us?
So it tells us a number of things, Naledi, you know, and one of the things that it tells us is that there is a narrative in South Africa, right, that seeks to suggest that the ANC voter is an irrational voter, the ANC voter is an unthinking voter. It's a very common narrative, and you particularly see this very strongly on social media, right? This refusal to accept that an ANC voter is a conscious, rational, and political voter who understands what they are doing, right? And I think one of the things that such communities tell us, right, is that whatever circumstances that they may be in, they, as a community, have experienced certain changes that matter to them. And those changes inform their political choices, right? Because it's very easy to dismiss such communities as, no, they are unthinking. And that is the narrative. It's such a very dangerous narrative to dismiss people as unthinking, as if they are unaware of the material circumstances and the material conditions in their own communities that have changed over time. And remember, what change looks like to Naledi and Malaika does not necessarily have to translate to what universally is accepted as change, right? So for me and you, change might have a very different meaning in a Gauteng that is urban, that is cosmopolitan and so on. But for a people who are in a community like that, a small community and so on, change might have very different meaning and different implications. And so when they experience that, however minimal you and I may think of it as, it is enough to inform a conscious political decision and to make a rational vote. And I think that says something. And even the fact that in that community, you even have dissenting voices, right? Or you've got people making different choices, voting for the EFF and so on, tells you about the level of consciousness within the community, because it says there are people who understand the significance and importance of different politics, different views, and they want different politics. They want a different type of government for themselves. And that tells you that such a community can't be a community of unthinking people. There are people there who are engaged every day in everyday processes of reimagining and rethinking their existence.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously are going to be having a big conversation, not just today, but over the next few days about, you know, even the credibility of the IEC really to run this election. It's been a question certainly in the run-up to this election, and I think it's going to be an important one, not just the credibility of the IEC, but also work that's being done by law enforcement. The concerns that you have on our ability to pull this off, the IEC, Nat Joins.
I don't have any concerns. I don't think that the IEC has, during this election or previous election, and the IEC runs all these elections, right? Not just national, provincial elections, local government elections previously in 2021. And we have not seen any I personally, at least I've not seen any fundamental reason why we can't trust that the IEC, which has done so much even before these, I mean, the preparation of the IEC does not begin with elections, right? The IEC is constantly engaged in a process of educating the electorate, of constantly mobilizing the electorate. This part of this you know, growth that we are seeing in the number of young people who are now coming in and saying, you know, we want to vote and so on, is partly the work of the IEC that engaged in very, very extensive voter registration drives and pulled in a lot of resources to make that happen, right? And so I'm not sure what is it that, and you know, with every election in South Africa or elsewhere in the world, there will be some difficulties and so on. And I mean, South Africa is a very vast country. There will be certain different spatial challenges, you know, logistical challenges and so on. But I don't believe that those alone negate the great work of the IEC and that it should necessarily make us alarmist about its capacity to pull off the election.
There's so much to get through. Malaika staying with us, of course, throughout the next few hours here on Channel 405. Great insights that she'll have for us as well as we observe the 29th of May general elections. You're still